Here's two classic quilt blocks you'll love to use in any of your sewing projects, including the Sawtooth Star pattern that would be great for the upcoming holidays.
The tools you'll need and supplies you'll need for this quilt block are 6 background fabrics. You can use any background color. If you want to use a low volume, you can use that, or just a plain white. Then you'll need a center block and 2 solid or other coordinating blocks with your center block. And they can all be the same color. It doesn't have to be different. So they are all 5-inch squares. So if you have a charm pack and you've got leftover charm squares, this would be perfect to make a Shoo Fly block. And you can use the entire charm pack and make several Shoo Fly blocks and make a quilt. Okay, so to get started, we're going to start by making half square triangles. And you'll need 2 of your background fabrics along with 2 of your solid. And what we're going to do is put, right sides together, and then we are going to draw a line from corner to corner. Okay, so you'll need a mechanical pencil or some kind of marking tool to draw your line. And you don't really have to worry about whether it's, it's not going to show or anything after you've sewn your block. Okay, so now you've drawn your line, you're going to sew 1/4 of an inch on each side of this line. So I'll take it to my machine and I'll do that, and you're going to do that to 2 of these. You're going to need 2 blocks, right side spacing. So I'll go ahead and I'll do that to both of these, and I'll come back and show you what to do next. Okay, so I've sewn these together, and now all we need to do is cut them. And you can use your rotary cutter or a pair of scissors. So now we're just going to open them up, and you'll see you have a half square triangle. So I'm going to finger press this to the red fabric so that the seam is folded over to the red, and I'll do that on all 4 of these, and I'm going to iron them. I just like to finger press them first. Sometimes they tend to roll and then you'll get, where it's like this instead of straight. Okay, so now that we've ironed them, we can square them up. And to square them, you can use a 4.5-inch square like I have right here, because we're going to square them up to 4.5. So to do that, if you have the 4.5-inch square ruler, then you'll put this 45-degree line right in between these seams here. Just like that. And that will show you've got a little bit of excess around. Okay, and then you've got 4.5-inch half square triangle. So I'll do that to all of these, and then we'll start to lay out our block. Okay, and for your remaining background squares, before we get going, you're going to want to trim them down on one side to 4.5, and you'll do that to all of your white background. So you'll have a 5 by 4.5-inch background square. So if you've ever done a churn dash block, you'll know the Shoo Fly is similar to it. So we place our blocks just the same as if we were going to make a churn dash. Okay, so now we're just going to add our background squares and our center square. You'll add your 5-inch center square in the middle. And then you're going to take each of your background squares and you're going to place them on the sides. Remember that the 4.5 inch width is going to go vertical this way and horizontal the other way. This. So your 4.5 inch length is going to square up with your 4.5 inch squares, and then your 5 inch sides are going to line up with your 5 inch center square. So this is your block, and now all we need to do is sew it together. We're just going to sew them right sides together like this, and then over that one, and that'll give you your first row. And then we'll do the same with the second and the third row, and then we're going to put the rows together. Remember, your seams are still 4.5 inch. Your seams are still 1/4 inch on all of these. And then when we go to sew the rows together, I'll show you how to do that, so I can show you how to nest your seams. Okay, I have each of my rows sewn, and now I'm going to iron them. I'm going to iron them so that the seams will nest. So it's like for the top and the bottom, I'm going to iron my seams to the red fabric. You want it going out. Finger press that a little bit first. Okay. I'll press it just a tiny bit on the outside as well. Okay, and then I'll take the middle, and for the middle, I'm going to iron my seams going towards the middle, towards our center block. Okay, and then we'll do the bottom part going out, just like we did the top part. Okay, so now to sew our rows together, just take this top row and bring it over the middle row, and then find your seam here. Let's see, my thread's right there. Okay, and so now you can nest them because they're both going in the opposite direction. You just want to make sure there's no gap in between them and that they're not overlapping. And I'll just pull it back sometimes, and check and see like that. And then you can stick a pin or a clip in it. And then you're going to come over and do the same to the other side. And you can feel it with your finger, like if there's any gap or overlap. If it feels nice and flat, then you've got it. Okay, and then I'll sew those together, and then I'll just do the same thing with the bottom, bringing it up over this middle here and nest the seams. Okay, so here is our Shoo Fly block, and my block measures out to about 12 3/4 of an inch. So, and then you might have a little bit of edge like this where it's a little wonky. I'll just take my my ruler and trim that off straight, just a little bit to straighten up the edges. Okay, and so it still should measure about the same. Okay, so the materials that you're going to need to make this block are some patriotic fabric, and this is a fat quarter bundle that I got from Walmart. So any patriotic fabric, and you're going to need some white background to match. Okay, you'll also need, usual tools, a rotary cutter, ruler, rotary mat. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is cut out all of our fabric. From the white fabric, you will need 4 3.5-inch squares. And those squares are going to be our corner squares for our block. You'll also need 4 3.5 by 6.5-inch rectangles. And those we'll be using to make the flying geese units. Okay? You're also going to need 8 3.5-inch squares for our flying geese units. These will be whichever color that you choose for your points of the star. Okay? And then you're going to need a center square. And I've chosen this one from this fat quarter bundle because I want to fussy cut it out. You know, it's got USA, Land of the Free, America. So I thought this would look really cute in the middle of our block. Okay? You'll need 4 strips for your sashing. And I've just cut this out of the fat quarter at the length of, you know, I think it's like 18. Yeah, it's just the 18 by 2.5 inches. And I cut 4 of them out. You're not going to need the entire length, you know, be 18, but I'm okay with that because I like to cut them a little longer, and I cut them, you know, once I have it all together, I will cut them square. Okay? You'll also need a 18-inch square piece of fabric that is going to go behind our top pillow. It's going to be what I use to sandwich the top square and then quilt it. Now, you don't have to do that. You don't have to quilt it if you don't want to. Yeah, I like the look of it, so I'm going to do that. And you'll need some extra fabric for the binding, and I think I'm going to use this. It'll match the star points on the fabric, on the block on the front. And then for my back, I'm going to use this fabric because it even has a Sawtooth Star in it. So I was really excited to see that. So this, I think, will look really good on the back of our pillow. And then the back, I'm going to make it to where it's a slip pillow, sort of like a pillow sham, where all you need to do is insert your pillow form. So first of all, we're going to just go ahead and start assembling our block. So grab my 8 3.5-inch squares and the 4 3.5 by 6.5-inch rectangles. And so what you'll need to do is, to make our flying geese units, is you'll just take one of your squares, and I'm going to draw a line diagonally from corner to corner. Just line up our ruler, and then you'll need a marking tool. A pen or a pencil, because it's not going to show. And so then you'll take it and line it up on your rectangle, and then you're going to sew it right down that line, so on the line. And then when you're done with that one, you'll do the same thing for the next one. But first, we're going to go ahead and sew this because I want to show you what to do next. Okay, so I've sewn it all the way down this line, and now you're just going to fold it over and press it with your fingers. Just try not to stretch it too much. Okay, and then I'm just going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut it to where it has a 1/4 inch seam left. And these you can save, you know, for another project. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take our next square. Let's see. I didn't draw my line yet. We'll draw our line. Okay. And then we'll just do the same thing we did on that side, on this side. And you're going to sew all the way down that line straight to the end here, so that when you fold it over, it'll make your flying geese. Okay, so you can see I've used some clips to hold it down, but you can use pins or whatever you need. Okay, so I have sewn the other side, and I'm just going to fold it over and finger press it. And then I will cut it again with my scissors. Okay, and there's our flying geese unit. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is iron this. And I've made my other ones, so I have them ready. So you need 4 units. And I'm just going to iron it to where these are just flat, you know, just like it tends to go in that direction. So that's how I'm going to iron them. And I'll just flip it. And then you'll just do that to each of your units. Okay, so now that I've ironed all of my units, I'm just going to start to lay them out. And here's where you'll put your center in the middle. Okay, and then you're going to put your background squares in each of the 4 corners. And just for a little tip, before you start, I would suggest starching your back quarters before you cut them out. And then that way you get a more precise cut, but you also, it'll give you better points and stuff whenever you're sewing everything together. It should, you know, help you to get a nicer point in seams. Okay, so we have it all laid out, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sew this row first together, these 2, and then I will sew the middle and then the bottom. Now when you go to sew the top, sew your seams away, and you'll do the same thing for the bottom. Sew them where your seams are pointed away from the middle. And then when you get to the middle unit, you will sew and turn your seams towards the middle block. And that way they're all opposite, so whenever you go to sew them all together, they'll match up. Okay? So I'm going to take it to the machine, I'm going to sew each of my rows, and then I'll meet you right back here. Okay, so I've finished sewing each of the rows together. I just want to show you, like on the middle row right here, just whenever you go to sew, you can go slow, and then when you get to the middle here, you just want to make sure that your seam is going right through that point. If you can do that, you know, make sure that you're just crossing that point, then you'll have, when you turn it out, you'll have good points. Okay? And now we're going to sew each row together, and you can do the same thing on here when you're going through your seam, is just making sure that your seam is going to go right through that little point. Okay, so now I'm going to sew each of these rows together to make our block. Also, I wanted to show you, you have to match up your seams. You just want to nest your seams right next to each other and pin it or clip it. And I wanted to show you how, you can see here, like there's a gap on the bottom right there. You want to make sure, if you do have a little gap, that you're going to put that through your machine on the bottom. You want to make sure that it's on the bottom so that whenever you're sewing, your machine is going to naturally straighten that gap out. Okay, so I've finished the block and I've ironed it. And now I'm just trimming it up. I want to trim it to a 12-inch square. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to sash it. And that's where our sashing strips come in. And I have cut these long. You could cut it to 12 inches if you want. The sides are going to be 12 inches. I'm just going to leave it long. I'm going to start at the top and then I'll just trim off the excess. I'll do the same thing to this other side and then I'll come back and I'll show you how to do the top. Okay, so I have sewn the side sashes to the side and now I just need to trim them. I ironed them already and I'm ironing them to the red fabric. So I'll just turn it and I'll cut off the excess right here evenly. Okay, and I'll save these pieces for another project. Okay, so we have our side sashing, and now I'm just going to take another strip and I'm going to do the same thing and sew it to the top and the bottom. Like so. Okay, and then I'll just trim the sides as well when I'm done. So I'm going to do that and I'll meet you right back here. Okay, so I finished the top and the bottom and now we have the sash all the way around. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this fabric that's the same color as our points and I'm going to cut some 1 1/4 inch strips and I'm going to put another sash around it just so this blue, will coordinate with our blue points. And that way we're going to have about a 17 or 18 inch square so that it'll be big enough to put our 16 inch pillow form in. Okay, so I'm going to cut these up into 1 1/2 inch strips. 1 1/4 inch strips. So now I'll just go and I'll sew these all the way around. Okay, so I've put on my second sashing. As you can see, I ironed it and I trimmed it and made it as flat as I could. So this is our top of our pillow and it measures out to be approximately 17 inches square. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to quilt it. So I'm just going to put that aside. I'm going to grab a piece of just a plain white backing. This is not really going to show because it'll be inside your pillow. So it can be any, fabric that you want. I'll just lay it out. And this is about 18 by 22. It's like a fat quarter size. And then I cut out a piece of batting. I think my batting's like 20 by 20. Just going to layer that over the top. Just want to smooth it all out. And then I will put my top back on. Okay, and so now all we have to do is baste it. Now I'm using a piece of batting. Well, it's a fleece batting, but it's not fusible. You can use any kind of batting or fusible fleece to do this. And if you don't want to quilt the top of your pillow, you don't have to. I just like the look of it, Okay, so how I'm going to do this, let's see. You can free motion quilt it if you want, or just straight lines. I'm just going to follow the slant of these points and just cross hatch it in both directions. I'm not going to cross hatch over the sashing. I'm just going to do it in the block area. And then for the sashing, I'll just do a stitch in the ditch. I'm not going to quilt over the sashing. Okay, and so I'll just start basting it with my quilting safety pins. And you can see these are the curved ones. Makes it easier to baste. And I'll just go ahead and put that all over the top, and then I'll quilt it, and I'll meet you right back here. Okay, so I have finished quilting my top, and I have just a little few threads I need to cut off. But you can see I did a cross hatch in the middle, and then I just did stitch in the ditch around the sashing. Okay, I just did a basting stitch all the way around the edge with about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge, just to keep it all intact. Okay, so now I'm just going to trim it up, trim away all my batting. And you can use scissors if you want, if you don't have a rotary cutter. I'm just going to use my rotary cutter. Okay, so now all that we need to do is start preparing our back. And you can see, I wanted to show you the back of the stitching, the quilting. Okay, so I'm going to set this aside for a minute and grab the fabric for my back. Okay, so for the backing, the way I'm doing this is I'm going to fold, have it layered over the edge so that it makes sort of like an envelope pillow where all you have to do is just insert your pillow form, take it out if you need to. Okay, so you want the top panel of your backing to be a little bit wider than the shorter end. Okay, because you want it to overlap. So my fat corner here is about 18 by 22. I'm going to cut it so that it is, we're going to have two pieces. I'm going to cut one end about 9 inches, and that will leave me with 13 inches on the other side so that we can overlap it. Before I do that, I want to measure this real quick just to be sure what we got here. Okay, so our top is 17 inches square. Okay, so take my fat quarter and cut a 9-inch piece off of one end. Okay, so now I'm going to take these to the machine, and I want to hem them. Just want to fold over the edge about 1/2 of an inch. And then again, or you could do it at 1/4 of an inch. Let's see. I'm going to flip this. And you're going to do the same thing with the other side. But the other side, I think I'll do the hem just a little bit shorter. You can put as many clips or pins in it as you need. And I'm just going to go to the machine and top stitch this. And I'll do the same thing to this one. And then meet you right back here. Okay, so I've hemmed up both of my pieces of the backing, and I put 2 rows of top stitch. Okay, and I did that on both of them. Okay, and now all we have to do is put them on our back. Let's see, this is the way it's going to be. So turn it over. And you can do this in any direction that you want. If you prefer to have it like up and down, or if you want to do it side to side, whichever way is that you like. I think I'm going to do it this way. Okay, and this is our shorter piece, so this will go on the bottom part, and this will go on top, and we're going to overlap them. And you can have it overlap, you know, it's probably enough that I could overlap it like 2 inches. You could do a little less if you want. I think I'm going to go ahead with the 2 inches. Sure. Okay. And to keep it secure in place, I think I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use my safety pins and base the top of it all along here just to make sure that it's going to stay in place. And then you can also use some clips for the sides if you want. But you want it to hang off with just a little bit. I have it hanging off, and I'll secure it from the back, and then I'm going to sew it from the front. That way I know it should all line up well. Of course, you can use straight pins for these to do this if you want. Just go ahead and use my safety pins. Okay, that should be enough to secure it. And I'm going to turn it over. And right where I basted on my edges here, I'm just going to go and I'm going to sew it just maybe right above that line, just to give it a little bit more of a seam there, a little bit bigger than the 1/8 of an inch. Maybe not quite so a 1/4 of an inch, because then it'll go into your sashing. But yeah, I'm going to do that all the way around, and then we'll go on to the binding. Okay, so I'm done sewing that all the way around. I'm just going to take out my safety pins here. Okay, I have to say these safety pins worked really well for that. Okay, and you can see here's our flap to insert our pillow. Now I'm just going to trim off this excess, and then we'll start to bind it. Okay, so here's our pillow, almost finished. Now we're going to make the binding. Now for binding, you could do, instead, if you don't like to do binding, you can do a piping. But I mean, I'll do that in another tutorial for a pillow or something, but today I just wanted to do the binding. So we're going to cut our binding. Let's see, set this aside, and I decided to use this flag fabric to do the binding, because I like how if I cut it this way, it'll make sort of like a stripe around the whole pillow. So just going to trim and off my edge here, straighten it. Okay. So for the binding, you don't want to go too far over this sewn edge. I mean, because we do have, if the 16-inch pillow form is going to fit, you don't want it to be too tight and then it not fit inside. So I'm going to measure between the seams. This ruler is 14 inches. About 14 right here. Go over. So it measured out to be about 16 and about 16 and a quarter. So that's good. So if we need that little space on the side for our binding, it should still fit inside the form and look really nice. Okay. So I'm going to cut my strips at 2 1/4 of an inch. I'm probably going to cut 5 strips because these are 18 inches long, I believe. Yeah, about 18 and a half. So, yeah, I'll cut about 5. 4 would probably go around it, you know, but I'm going to cut 5 to make sure it's long enough. And I want to miter my my strips when I'm sew them all together. Okay. So now I'll just take these to the machine and I'm going to sew them together in a miter. That way they'll open up and just keep going. Okay, and to do that, in case you have never made them like that before, you can sew them end to end if you want. But to miter them, you're just going to overlap it just a little bit over here. And then you're going to sew diagonally here from this corner to this corner so that when you open it up, they're joined. Okay? And you can draw a line there too if it's easier for you. And I would overlap it a little bit like this. And you want to start right here in this corner and go right down to the corner here. And then draw your line. Okay, and then you'll sew on that line. And you'll do that to each of your strips so you have them all together. And then you can go in and cut off the excess. Okay. Okay, so I have all of my my strips sewn together, and now I'm just going to trim them off. I like to make my seam a little bit larger than 1/4 of an inch because I'm going to open them up when I iron them. And this way they lay a little bit more flat and it'll be less bulky whenever you go to turn it over. After you've done that to all of your, where you've mitered it, you're going to just turn it, fold it in half and iron it long ways. Okay, so I have my binding all ready to go. I just wanted to show you where I flattened it by opening the seam right there in the where the miters are, where it's sewn together, and then it makes such more, you know, flatter to do it that way. One good thing about making binding for a small project is so much easier to handle, because with a quilt it's a lot more binding you have to work with. Okay, so the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to attach it from the back, because I want to be able to turn it over to the front and then sew it down. You can do this by hand if you like to bind by hand. I do like to bind by hand. But for a small project like this, and I want to get done, I'm just going to machine bind it. So if you were going to bind it by hand, I would attach it to the front so you can turn it to the back and then bind it. Okay? So just start with taking our raw edge, lining it up, and I'm going to leave a amount right here so that we can attach the ends together. I'm going to do that further down a little bit, I think in the middle. So now I'm just going to go around and put some clips. So when you get down to the corner, before you turn it, you're going to want to sew all the way down to about 1/4 of an inch away, and then I turn my project, and then you're going to sew out to the corner of this edge, just sewing it this way like a miter with your thread. And then once you've done that, you can turn it, flipping it over this way and then back again. And then you'll start sewing down this edge. That way, whenever you turn it over to the other side, you're going to get a nice, crisp, mitered corner. And I'll show you on the machine when I'm sewing how to do that. Okay? Okay, so I just wanted to show you how I'm going to do this corner and how you can do each of the corners. If you've never done a binding, if you've never sewn a binding before, this will be helpful for you. And let's see. So I have my machine set to 1/4 of an inch seam. My hand's in the way. Okay, so we're almost to the corner. I'm going to stop about 1/4 of an inch away. Okay, and I'll lift up my foot here, and I'm going to turn it, and I'm going to sew right off the edge here over the corner. Okay. And then all you have to do is turn, going over that corner, making sure that these edges here are straight, and then flip it back over. And at that point, you could put a clip back right there to hold it, and then you'll turn your corner here. Do this. And then put your foot right over the edge there, and then I'll back up a couple of stitches, and then keep stitching along the side. And then you'll do that to every time that you come to a corner. Okay, and then when I get to the end to connect our binding, I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so I'm down to the end, and the way that I do this is the easier method. There's other methods, but I have about a 5-inch piece here. I'm going to cut this piece down to 2 inches. Since I find my scissors. Okay, so I'm just going to eyeball it, about 2-inch piece. Okay, and then this piece is longer, so I'm going to lay this out over that 2-inch piece that I just cut, and I'm going to cut it as well about 1/4 of an inch from where this piece is laying here, 1/4 of an inch from where the seam is. So about right here. Okay, and then I just take this piece and I'm just going to open up this one on the bottom and lay this one right inside of it. Just like that. Okay, looks good. So I'm going to take this piece and I'm going to fold it over just a tiny bit to give it a little bit of a hem. Not much. You don't have to have much, but just so that it isn't a raw edge. And then you're going to place this piece right back where you had it inside this one. Okay, I don't know if you can see that really good. All right. And make sure that it all lays flat. And then I will continue to sew this along the edge. And I'm going to go right past it, just to, and then back up, so to secure the stitches. Okay, and there's our edge. Okay, so now we're all done, and we can start to fold it over onto the front side. This, and then here you can go ahead and put some clips too, just to clip it in place. And you'll do it just like that, and then you just go right on the edge here, about 1/8 of an inch in, and sew your binding down to the front. Okay, and any loose threads you find, you will have some of them, you just cut those off. Okay, and then sew the top stitch. Okay, so I'll do that, and then I'll show you what the pillow looks like. Okay, so before I continue, I just wanted to show you how to do the corners. You'll just lay it flat down one way, like this, when you get to the corner, and then you'll just take the other side and turn it right over that corner. It's hard to do with my gloves on. Okay, yeah. You're just going to go straight, lay it down straight here, and then when you get to the corner, turn it over like this, and then you could put a clip there. To hold it down, and then when you go to sew, you're going to sew all the way on the edge here, and then you'll catch this edge and sew down the other direction and keep going that way. Okay, so here is our completed pillow. Turn it around so you can see the back. our flap here. So thanks for sewing along with me today. If you love this project, please give me a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe for more sewing and crafting fun. Bye bye for now.